Welcome to Joffiel Whispers. My name is Nairi. I'd like to talk today about knowledge and the philosophers. Philosophy is about knowledge, so let's look at philosophy. Love of wisdom, philo, it means love. Sophos means wisdom. Philosophical wisdom comes through knowledge, which comes, of course, through observation and logic. There are two types of knowledge as far as we know: knowledge of the material world and knowledge of the imaginary, intuitive world, two sides of the brain perceiving the world in two different ways. To live a balanced life, the two sides of the brain also need to be in balance. But with the dominance of digital technology and mass communication in our modern world, is it possible that the left side of the brain is being overstimulated and the right side being neglected for most of us? And if so, does that matter? If it does matter, why does it matter? I think we were born with a bilateral brain for a reason, and I think it's safe to presume it is to do with survival. For a member of the human species to function well, both sides need to be active. To what degree, I don't know. I'm not a scientist or a psychologist. But logic would tell you that we are made that way for a reason. Both sides of the brain have different functions, but since they appear to be pretty much the same size, perhaps we can make a reasonably logical assumption that they are of equal importance. So if we go back to a seemingly simpler world, this offers the possibility of gaining access to knowledge we may have lost over the course of human history, or at least partly lost. The ancient philosophers explored the same concepts as do modern philosophers, but without the complication of monotheistic religions, where debates of the spiritual and intuitive often come down to questioning the very presence of God, if not what form that entity might take. In ancient times, where there were many gods representing our archetypal behaviours, the presence of some kind of powerful entity beyond our immediate perception was a given. So the debates were not about whether a God figure existed, but about the nature of God. And what did they study? Well, the same subjects as do modern philosophers: spirituality and the soul, logic, ethics, aesthetics, metaphysics, mortality, knowledge of the physical world through observation, the soul and consciousness, metempsychosis or reincarnation, mathematics, and much more. Let's go back through history, back to the ancient Greek philosophers, in fact past the ancient Greek philosophers, beyond Socrates and Plato, Aristotle and Pythagoras, to the most famous of the mystery schools, the Eleusinians of around approximately 1400 years BC, more than 4,000 years ago. They were named for a community in Attica, Greece, and most of their teachings are believed to have been a combination of the Chalcadian mysteries from ancient Babylonia, from ancient Egypt, and from Hindustan in northern India. They are referred to the mystery schools for a reason, and it's not because the knowledge has been lost, but because only those members of modern society or of their society who were regarded as having sufficient intellectual capacity and moral fibre were initiated into them and sworn to secrecy on pain of death. It's believed that Socrates, 1,000 years later, rejected admission into the mystery schools for that reason. He knew his search for truth and his desire to inculcate wisdom into the youth of his day would be silenced. Knowledge of those mysteries remain to this day, having been passed down through generations to modern-day societies or modern-day organisations such as the Freemasons and others. Perhaps the time has come for the general populace to transform itself out of modern decadence and ignorance into a finer version of itself so all can share in that knowledge and contribute to a greater future for humanity as a whole. I'm not a practicing philosopher, or I'm not a trained philosopher. I'm no expert on the subject. I began to study philosophy at university many years ago, before most of you were born probably, but I quickly realised intuitively that true knowledge can only be found within, through personal contemplation, and it couldn't be found through language because language is limited. Our thinking processes are limited by the language of our own particular culture and may not even encompass concepts that are out there to be accessed if we knew how. So the only subject I did pursue was a related subject, logic, and to me that gave more insight into the way I might understand the truth than just studying the thoughts of others, although of course they're important. However, I have spent a lot of time thinking about those matters over the years, and that has led me to want to share those insights with you. My source reference is Edgar Cayce's book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and of course one needs to bear in mind that very little is known definitively about such distant events, about what happened 4,000 years ago. So most writings do come with a question mark, but their substance holds much truth as borne out by many scholarly works over a long period of time. Philosophy is not new. It's been around probably ever since mankind first had language. It needs to be understood that an essential part of those ancient teachings was the use of symbolism in order to maintain secrecy. The use of symbolism is universal, of course. We are surrounded by symbols. The Red Cross, for instance, is a symbol of charity and even martyrdom. The black dragon is a symbol of nationalism and vengeance. The square and compass, a symbol of the Freemasons. The set square representing virtue, and the compass, a guide to restraint in one's conduct. The cross is a symbol of Christ. The yin-yang symbol is half masculine, half feminine energy inside a circle, meaning representing the universe. The logos on our computer screens are symbols. We are surrounded by them. These are all symbols in the public domain and are universally understood, but what about those symbols also in the public domain, which are only understood by initiates? Because we are surrounded by symbolism, most of them are overlooked by the collective because they have, or appear to have, no relevance to our individual lives. In fact, they are relevant to us, but we're not aware of them. And some of them actually are quite sinister. For instance, the symbols of paedophilia, which can even be found in some of the Walt Disney movies for children. They're often seen on social media, including television shows for children, and notoriously in the Walt Disney movies. They're a way of communication for those who do know their significance, and they can be a powerful form of control over our lives. And who does that controlling? The people who do understand the symbols, who know something we don't know. They are able to communicate messages to one another that we can't interpret or even know exist. We need to understand that so we can begin to look at our environment with a clearer understanding of how we have been separated over hundreds, if not thousands of years, from knowledge which is fundamental to us leading more fulfilling and empowered lives. More and more people are beginning to see this, and I see a growing mistrust of all entities who control our lives, especially in the political sphere. Mistrust, unfortunately, though, leads to suspicion, and we're in danger of acting in ways that are not in our best interests as a result. And I come back to the subject of knowledge. Knowledge, not public opinion or collective opinion. The only way through this labyrinth is to come back to the inner self. To understand oneself on a deeper level is to understand humanity. We are all created in a very similar way, and our responses to the universe, to our environment, are similar if not identical. To understand oneself on a deeper level is to understand humanity. To function well, to create a world free of war, of poverty, of ignorance and slavery, is to see the truth behind those conditions and to act accordingly in a positive and creative way rather than a reactive and fearful way. Taking action based on ignorance results in fear. Taking action based on knowledge results in empowerment. That is why we need to look back through history to understand how the world has really functioned over thousands of years and create a new reality based on fundamental truths about humanity and our role in the greater cosmos. So back to the Eleusinian mysteries, which were divided into the greater and the lesser mysteries. The lesser mysteries were dedicated to Persephone, goddess of the underworld, who was carried there by force by Pluto to be his wife, and the greater mysteries, which were sacred to Ceres, mother of Persephone by Zeus, and the goddess of agriculture, particularly corn. The soul of man, often called Psyche, is symbolised by Persephone as a spiritual part of his, meaning collectively man, not just male, but mankind, whose true home is the higher world, free from bondage in human form. According to this doctrine, the human form is, in Casey's words, a quagmire, a false and impermanent thing, the source of all sorrow and suffering. He goes on to say, if he, meaning man, does not rise above ignorance during his sojourn here, man goes to death into eternity to wander about forever, making the same mistakes he made here. If he does not outgrow the desire for material possessions here, he will carry it with him into the invisible world where, because he can never gratify the desire, he will continue in endless agony. So what does he mean by that? He means that the majority of people are not ruled by their spirit or soul, but by their animal nature. They are, in effect, asleep. And before I go on, this brings me to mention the fact that we do live in a highly materialistic world, a world of greed and fear, of lack, which may well lead to our undoing. The greatest problem facing us has nothing to do with climate change, wars, personal identity, racial issues, pandemics, and other matters, even though that may be what we're led to believe. But it's the destruction of the environment through greed. That's a part of our nature we really need to look at, and we're all guilty of that at some level. Our desire for material wealth as a form of security is driving us to destroy our environment without any thought for the future. If we understand that once our basic needs are being met, food, clothing, the company of others, a commitment to others, and a roof over our heads, then all our added possessions are a conceit. And I'm not suggesting for one moment that we should all own nothing and be happy, but we should look at where our personal requirements lie and understand that a life connected to spirit, to the greater universe, is fundamental to our well-being more than our material world. We're not in this physical body for long. We're part of a greater plan and need to understand that as a fundamental truth. That's where knowledge begins. Transmigration and reincarnation were part of the Eleusinian schools of thought. These mystics believed that suicide was surrounded by a profound mystery which they could not reveal, but which would result in profound sorrow for the abandoned soul. In other words, they believed in heaven and hell, as does the Catholic Church, which I will also refer to later. Initiates into the lower mysteries were subject to a complicated and often dangerous ritualistic drama in which they faced the horrors of Hades or hell. Those who survived the ordeal were called the Mysties, which meant one who saw through the veil or had unclouded vision. It also signified that the candidate had been brought up to the veil, which would be torn away in the highest degree. In other words, they had faced and recognised their own ignorance. That is the veil. The greater mysteries to whom most of the initiates were admitted were sacred to Ceres, who searched far and wide for her lost daughter Persephone, symbolising the soul, carrying two torches of intuition and reason to help in her search. Intuition and reason. When she finally found her daughter, not far from Eleusis, she taught the people there to grow corn, which is sacred to her. After she pleaded with Pluto to release Persephone, he finally conceded on the condition she returned to the bowels of the earth for half of every year, that is, Persephone. The Greeks believed that Persephone was a manifestation of the sun energy which disappeared during winter and returned each spring. In other words, it was a symbol of the changing seasons and of life and death. Edgar Cayce also writes, "It is probable that the Eleusinians realised that the soul left the body during sleep, or at least was made capable of leaving by the special training which they were in a position to give. The initiate was taught how to intercede with Pluto to permit Persephone, the initiate soul, to ascend from the darkness of his material nature into the light of understanding. The gods were said to inhabit the tops of the mountains where the 12 deities of the Greek pantheon were said to dwell together. In his initiatory wanderings, the neophyte therefore entered chambers of ever-increasing brilliancy to portray the ascent of the spirit from the lower worlds into the realm of bliss. Women and children could also be included in these rites. Some of the symbols are practiced in Freemasonry to this day and also by other secret societies. And of course this also was what the Knights Templar in the 12th century were seeking when they went over to Jerusalem and the Temple of Solomon. They were trying to find the writings of the ancient Eleusinian mysteries, or even back to ancient Egypt. Cayce said, "The higher teachings were given to only a limited number of initiates who, because of superior mentality, showed a comprehensive grasp of their underlying philosophical concepts. That the mysteries of Eleusis were based upon great and eternal truths is attested by the veneration in which they were held by the great minds of the ancient world." One of the most intriguing aspects of these times is the celebration of Bacchus or Dionysus, god of wine and vegetation, as one of the early versions of the Christos myth, which raises questions about the origins of Christianity. He's purported to have been born of a virgin on the 25th of December, isn't that interesting, and to have performed great miracles for the good of mankind. He, Dionysus, was put to death by the Titans and rose from the dead on the 28th of March, another interesting date. He was known as the Saviour and shown to the people just as the child is in Rome on Christmas Day morning in modern times. His resurrection is supposed to have been enabled by Apollo, who is represented by the sun. The similarity to the birth of Christ that began the Christian era is hauntingly obvious, and there have been a number of compelling books written speculating that the beginnings of Christianity do go back to ancient Egypt. Some sources claim that Moses was in fact the 18th dynasty pharaoh Akhenaten, husband of Nefertiti and father of Tutankhamun, who was expelled from Egypt due to his proclamation that there was only one God. It's no way of proving that. This is speculation, but it's interesting speculation. Two of these publications I have read myself, one entitled Christianity and Ancient Egyptian Religion by Ahmed Osman, and another entitled To Moses from Akhenaten by the German Egyptologist Jan Assmann. Even the famous psychologist Sigmund Freud was known to have expressed this possibility, this possible interpretation of that story. And interestingly, the time of the 18th dynasty coincides almost exactly to the time of the Eleusinian mysteries. Curiouser and curiouser. This raises a question in my mind. Could the Father, the Son and the Holy Ghost of Christian teachings, the Trinity, have been derived from the Father of all gods, Apollo, the Son, spelled S-U-N, as Bacchus, the Light and the Holy Ghost as being the underworld or antithesis of the Sun? Or perhaps there's another interpretation. This is merely a moment of reflection, not a statement of fact or strongly held belief. But all those questions are really interesting and worth addressing. Very few beings who have not been initiated into these mysteries are aware of them, let alone privy to them. But when I refer to knowledge versus myth, and the need for balance between the rational left brain and the intuitive right brain, I wonder whether, in an age of artificial intelligence, mass communication, the separation from nature for the millions who live in large cities, along with the over-politicisation of our public institutions, we shouldn't look back to those early perceptions of what constitutes a valuable human life. Perhaps we have reached a level of collective intelligence as a species that it is time we embraced those deeper mysteries moving forward into the future. Something for you to think about. Thank you for joining me. If you'd like to reach out to me or find out a little about me, you can go to my website, nairij.com, where you can actually look at some of my paintings as a brief biography. You can listen to some of my music and even read the first chapter of my book, Jovial Whispers, if you have the time and inclination. I hope to see you next time. Until then, stay well, stay blessed.